Steve Lentini. I'm the founder of Lord and Lentini and the Acorn Brain. The Acorn Brain, that little voice, that little insidious voice that operates in my mind. And every time I ask people, thankfully, more people have it. And listening to that voice is the challenge, and that you can train your mind. And most people, we can see it in recent events, believe they're thinking, which causes them to react to events they can't control in really bizarre ways. And that's okay because we're human. I'm not making any of that wrong, because that's part of the voice. When we make others wrong because they think differently than we do, that can be reprogrammed to just let those events go and to live in the world as an observer of yourself, first and foremost, to live observing your thoughts. And when that mind tries to take over, the gift in it is it's urging you. It's urging you to take control. So it's a process. Before you can train your mind, you have to first recognize that you're telling yourself a BS story, right? No BS Coaching is one of my books. Wake up from the BS you tell yourself. And that's when you believe you're thinking. So the BS stories are: your parents did you wrong, your boss did you wrong, you want to tell everyone else about how certain events are so awful. You want to share, hey, you want to hear what happened to me this week? And you're looking for the woe is me, right? The victim story. So first, that's the place to begin, is notice all the places your mind enrolls you in something that makes you less than someone, makes you angry about circumstances that you can't control anyway. It makes you angry at others, sad, depressed, anxious, frustrated. When you begin to observe those thoughts, that's the beginning of training your mind, because first you have to notice it. And you can see so many instances today of people that just believe they're thinking. Well, they have a good reason to believe they're thinking. They have a good reason for their story. It's called justification. They're justification lies. And they're lies to yourself. They're lies so that your brain can be right. The brain wants to be right. And it's also urging you to take control. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff used to say, will you let the machine run you, or will you run the machine? That's what he called the voice, the machine. Rainer Maria Rilke in the 1800s called it the little hooligan, and he would ask the same question. Will you let the little hooligan run you, or will you run it? And what happens when we believe that thinking is we've trained our mind. And now neuroscientists and neuro researchers say that by the age of 35, our brain has automatic responses programmed, like default programs, right? Like the Windows 11, right? There's a program running the program. And you have things you automatically default to, like an app on the iPhone. You click on it and it opens. But there's a program, iOS, on an iPhone running the programs. There has to be an organization, an organizing power behind it all. And by the age of 35, you've set up your organizing program And if you believe your thinking and never question it, then you'll always live as what I call a reaction. You'll live as a reaction instead of a response. Just think of how many times maybe you've said it, but how many times you've heard other people say, "This is who I am, get over it." Okay, it's who they've chosen to be, and they've given up their power to create a life. So, first, start to recognize all the BS stories that your brain suggests. Now, let me give you some background about how the brain works. A great book, by the way, to read is Mind Magic by Dr. James Doty, D-O-T-Y. He's a neurosurgeon that got fascinated by the brain when he was doing surgeries and then became a neuro researcher, a neuroscientist, and did his own work about how the brain works. Here's what he said. Think of the brain this way. If you think of the brain in terms of a percentage, so 100%, and then 10% of the brain is what is required for us to live every day. That's all we really need. It's making sure we keep our schedule. It's making sure that we eat, right? The things we need to do. Get in the car, know what the keys are for, etc., right? So you get your 10% of your brain is running the things you need to do to live. He said, think of the remaining 90% this way. There's the unconscious. That's half the remaining 90%, or 45% of your brain is doing things like growing your hair. I mean, for some of us. And your nails, and watering your eyes, and replacing your skin cells, and all the cells in your body over time. You don't think about breathing or pumping your blood. Oh, wait, I got to make sure I pump my blood. It's all done automatically. That leaves 45% remaining, and he said, that's your subconscious. He said, now think of the subconscious, and I love this because it's very simple. Think of your subconscious as a file system and a bloodhound. Whatever you put in the file system, the bloodhound goes searching for evidence, despite any evidence to its contrary. To the contrary. So whatever you decide to put in that file system, your brain, your bloodhound now, is running off to find evidence that you're right. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not right. What it means is you need some discernment about what you put into the file system. And that's where most people don't do it. They have no idea about using some discernment and careful about what they put into their file system. Now, other neuro researchers also talk about what you feed grows. Joe Dispenza says in the universe, whatever's fed grows in the whole universe. And what doesn't get fed withers and dies. So you're feeding your mind. And the important thing to remember is you have a choice of what to feed. So if you're not developing a level of thinking above your thinking, right? Think of it this way, where you're the observer, how will you ever change what you feed? And again, if you're feeding angry thoughts, victim thoughts, right? The woe is me, anxious thoughts, depressive thoughts. And if you continue to feed those, then that's what you'll have more of. It'll grow. So it's important, once you begin to notice your thinking, decide what you're going to feed. So this is, again, my book, right? No BS coaching. Wake up to the BS. Wake up from the BS you tell yourself. And it's on Amazon. Steve Lentini. Go to Amazon and put books by Steve Lentini. And then a few weeks ago, an idea came to me about how to train your mind, written by a dragon. And it just popped into my head, kind of quietly from nowhere. And Wayne Dyer used to say, from nowhere now here, pay attention to those kind of thoughts. And so I just filed it in my mind and I made a note in my iPhone under notes, book title. That was on a Monday. That's following Sunday. 6 days later, I woke up at 3 a.m. with the whole book in my head. It was like a download. And by 4 p.m. that Sunday, I had 8 out of 11 chapters written. I had it all mapped out, including an epilogue. And then during that week, either late or early morning hours, I completed the book. And it was published at the end of that week. That's on Amazon. And it's called How to Train Your Mind, written by a dragon. Program your mind for success. And I'm a dragon in Chinese astrology, meaning I was born in the year of the dragon. Now, that title to me was fun because it's a play on how to train your dragon. And what I talk about in the book is first you have to decide, as Chris Collins says in his work, I Am Leader, if life is happening to you or for you. To you means you're a victim of circumstance. Woe is me runs you. Everything's happening to you. For you means you're looking for the gift. You're looking at life as a friend. And that's what I've discovered in my own work, in my life, is that until I was 50, mostly life was happening to me. Now, in my 40s, I did get a coach. And I decided that there was another possibility. I still wasn't totally developing that level of thinking above my thinking. Now, at some point in my 40s, I read the book Are You Ready to Succeed by Dr. Sri Kumar Rao. He talks as well about developing a level of thinking above your thinking. So I started to look at my thinking. And then when I was 50, I had a near-death experience. 1 second I was fine. I was doing a seminar, in fact, training a group of salespeople. And the next second I needed an ambulance. And 5 days later, I flatlined. And I'm not going to go into that whole story now, but what I learned from that experience, I was grateful waiting for the ambulance. And then when the ambulance got there and the EMTs asked me, how are you doing? I said, I don't know how my body's doing, and I am grateful. I had this idea that this was something that was going to totally change my life. It was a knowing. I was fine. In my mind, I was fine. It didn't matter what showed up because I was surrendered to what was occurring. And I would say that was the first time I had officially surrendered like that. And then 5 days later, I got another invitation to totally surrender. So November 13th, I went in the hospital via ambulance to the emergency room. 5 days later, I flatlined with 2 friends at the end of my bed. And during that experience, in my life review, right? People talk about a life review, the immense light, then a life review. Only the good I had done flashed before me in my life review. And none of this thinking, what I now call the acorn brain, right? The little voice, that small-minded thinker, was there in what's next. I don't call it death anymore. I call it what's next. And then I was asked a question by a voice I cannot describe. I call it an otherworldly voice. Stay or go. And my consciousness, because I didn't have a body, and none of this little voice went with me, none of that little talker. My consciousness surrendered with thy will be done. And I was right back in intensive care. It didn't matter if I stayed there and what's next or came back here. And that began my work of helping people overcome that machine, that voice, that little hooligan, so that you can learn that you do have the power to run your life and create your life. What's going on in your life? If you are in the middle of a mess, you've created it. So it becomes the first step to programming your mind, training your mind, is to take accountability and responsibility for the messes you've created. Now, the good news is that same power that created those messes, by changing your mind and you running your mind and deciding what you're going to feed and what will grow, what you focus on, you have the power to create what you want, the life you want. And it's about paying attention to what energizes you. What do you love to do? What energizes you? I love helping people. I love standing up and talking and coaching people about it, whether it's in a group or individually. That energizes me. Writing books energize me. And later this year, I have another book coming out called In Plain Sight. Learn to see what most people miss and embrace life as it is. It's all part of this series where I'm talking about training your mind. And there's a steps, right? Identify your BS stories that you tell yourself that have you running around being run by and managed by that little voice right here, that little acorn brain. And then recognizing that there was a power that created the messes, you, with your thinking. It wasn't life happening to you. It was life happening for you to wake you up. And I want to save you the same 2x4 that I got in the near-death experience, although it would be an amazing thing for all of us to experience what's next. Get a peek at it, not before this recording ends. But we wouldn't be so petty, and we would be more powerful creators. We would stay on the path of what energizes us and let go of things that drain us. Why be involved in work or relationships? Anything that drains you, doing anything that drains you. Do what energizes you. Focus on what energizes you. To begin with, maybe you just think about, make the list of what energizes you. And then start paying attention to only doing those things and letting go of, and take some time to do it. You may need some help. You may need to enroll others. You may need to talk to your boss. You may need to talk to your spouse, your significant other, your life partner. But start to let go of what does not energize you. By focusing on what energizes me, ideas come to me. The No BS coaching book that I showed you, that came to me, the idea came to me in July, and over the course of a month, it came to me. Every morning, a couple of days a week, ideas would come and I'd get up and write. Sometimes I would wake up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. with an idea for a chapter, and I'd get up and write a chapter. That took a month. In October came the idea for how to train your mind. And in a week, that was done. And it just came to me because it energizes me. That's what I'm paying attention to. Events like this, doing this to help people, energize me. And I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm glad to coach people. I'll give people that listen to any of these messages, if you email me, a free coaching. Yeah, free. I don't care whether you've bought a book. You could. I don't care if you bought a book. I want to help people recognize what's important in this world and discover their own power to create. And there's so many people in our society, they're trying to enroll people in, we'll protect you, we'll take care of you. No, it's your job. It's not government's job, it's not politicians' job. And they only add fuel to the fire of that little machine, that little voice. Fascinating how many people want you to be powerless. They're not trying to convince you of anything. You think about it. You decide what you're going to feed and whether you want circumstances to run you or for you to be the master of circumstances. If you're letting that little brain, I accuse you of being a victim of circumstance, not in an angry way, but in a way to wake you up, to experiment with your own life, with your own thinking, to consider feeding only what energizes you and running the mind. Now, if I ever tell you I found the way to live a life, run away. That's what I tell my clients, and some of whom have been with me for over 20 years. One for 25 coming next year, 25 years. Another for 21 years. Others for 15, 10, 12 years that I've worked with them to help them maintain and manage their mind and train their mind, because that little voice is powerful. It's insidious. It tries to weave its way into everything because it's inviting us. The gift in it happening for you is it wants you to run it. It's like a little kid at the end of a supermarket aisle throwing a tantrum for a candy bar or a toy in the toy aisle. That voice wants some discipline, and it's happier when you run it. You're happier when you run it. So let's go back to what neuro researchers are proving now with fMRIs. Shirzad Chamine wrote the book Positive Intelligence, and from that, then he developed what's called the PQ program. And there's a link to their assessments in my books because I'm a certified PQ coach as well. And what Shirzad did with Stanford University, they did a research program looking at mostly negative thinking people whose thinking was predominantly negative. And they did fMRIs on them. And during the tests, a part of their brain would light up. The neurons would light up so that they associated that area of the brain with negative thinking in the neocortex. As they trained the people to default more often to positive thinking, they ran through a program, which is part of the PQ program today. As they did follow-up fMRIs, they found new neural pathways opening up in the opposite area of the negative part of that lit up in the neocortex. New neural pathways, like stroke victims, learning how to speak again, or learning how to walk, or learning how to operate the right hand or the left hand, wherever they had some brain damage. New neural pathways open for those people, and they were able to develop those capabilities again, whether it was speech or walking or new neural pathways open for stroke victims. Well, it's the same for negative thinkers and people that don't have the wherewithal to manage their mind. They believe they're thinking. And if it's mostly negative, over 70% of the time negative, they have a very active part of the neocortex that stores those negative events. And they default to that automatically. Right? We talked about up until the age of 35, your subconscious is remembering all those responses you had to certain people, to certain situations, and it becomes automatic. Now, let me give you a little something to compare that with. So let's say you just learned how to drive. You're nervous, you're paying attention to everything, you're really hyper focused on learning how to drive. Flash forward 10 or 12 years later, or maybe even less, maybe even a few years later, at least for me, I notice I'm driving down the highway, and every once in a while my brain says, wait, who just drove the last 5 miles? It just happened automatically. My subconscious had taken over. I maintained my distance, I maintained my speed, but I didn't have the same awareness I had when I was learning how to drive. The subconscious takes over. The same thing happens with the emotions that you react with up until the age of 35. Your mind now takes over if you let it. And you continue to react. And I hyphenate that word when I write, in quotes, react. Because when you react, you're living in the past. It's something you've previously learned and you've given up your control to that little hooligan or the machine or whatever you want to call it, the acorn brain. You've given up control. And the good news is you can reprogram your mind. You can train your mind. Joe Dispenza calls it remind yourself. He puts it in quotes. You can remind yourself. That's great news because most people don't believe it. And that's okay too. There's a whole purpose in all of that because life is happening for us, not to us. That's the basic choice. So when you decide that life is happening for you, you take control and you're not reacting anymore. You're responding in a completely new way in order to retrain or remind yourself, your brain. You got to prove this to yourself. Don't take my word for it. You can retrain yourself and remind yourself. And it's a fascinating experiment because when you start taking control, you prove to yourself that you have the power to create anything else that you desire, especially if it energizes you. Pay attention to that. That energized feeling is life itself helping you to discover what to focus on. And the more you focus on what energizes you and let go of what doesn't, surrender the fight, so to speak. If you're fighting life and you're going to have things your way no matter what, think of what Eckhart Tolle says, who wrote the book The Power of Now and A New Earth. If you Google Eckhart Tolle, he's got fascinating work that'll support you in reminding yourself. He says when you fight life, life fights you. And that's where I was before I had that near-death experience. I was fighting life, and I was going to win. Right? I was like in the ring, fighting with life. We don't have to. I mean, that is an amazing fact that you can discover for yourself. The fight is an invitation to surrender to what is, the now, in the moment, and then start to pay attention to what energizes you and leave behind all those thoughts that make you less than someone, that make you sad, anxious, depressed, or maybe even thoughts that make you more than others, because none of those are true. I can tell you that when I left my body from intensive care and was one with everything and nothing, one with the infinite, immense light, immense grace and mercy, and these words do not even describe it. Nothing from this world that I thought was important went with me. In my life review, there was no one saying, wow, you've written some books, and wow, you've spoken, and wow, you've had businesses that you've owned, and wow, you've done this and that and this and that. None of what I thought gave me value went with me. What gave me value was just being alive and then being one with everything and nothing in what's next. Right? Energy cannot be destroyed. My energy went from a physical body to a limitless body. And they didn't mention how many houses I had owned, how much money I had made, how many books I had written, the titles I had, the businesses I had. None of that gives us value. But you have to decide to let all that stuff go and stop striving for the outside recognition. What you want to do is live from the inside out, where you make a decision to focus on what energizes you. Why can't you have a life that impacts millions of people in a grand way and you have fun and make money? If you follow what energizes you, you're actually doing work for the universe, for the continued expansion and growth of the universe. And think about the fact that we live in a universe, it's all energy in all kinds of different forms, ever expanding and growing. This is what models how we should live our life. And it's infinite. It's not small-minded. Whatever created the universe, and for me, I call it God, but whatever created an infinite universe is not a small-minded thinker. We have the hubris to think, the ego that says we think like God. No, that's our job, is to learn to think like God, or the infinite, the creator, the quantum field, the goddess, the divine, the Abraham, the Christ consciousness, the Krishna, the Buddha, the Brahma, the Muhammad, all the prophets, except where humans change their wording, right? When you find something that talks about vengeance or revenge or anger or fighting, or that's where the human ego came into the writing, which is natural. I mean, especially if you go back 2, 3, 4,000 years, people had no idea they could program their mind. Everyone believed their thinking. You don't have to. That's the great news. Joe Dispenza talks about it. You can Google him. He's got books about it, and he's got a lot of YouTubes that help coach you into what to focus on when you take control. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff wrote about it. Rainer Maria Rilke wrote about it. I did the book Sage Advice a couple of years ago, Wisdom for Living from Throughout the Ages, where I did research on a whole bunch of sages. And I put their quotes in the book, things they said or have purported to say, because some of them go back to BC. But I can tell you it was advice for living. And these were people that had a complete different thinking about how life worked. There's a lot of evidence for it. It's up to you. Are you going to be a victim of circumstance or the master of your circumstances? And which one energizes you? You want to keep the story of how life is happening to you and it's keeping you down. It's holding you back. And then you have a cast of characters that are holding you back and keeping you down. And life itself. No, it's a choice. You've allowed that voice to run you and those circumstances to run you, making you a victim of circumstance. Now, to become a master of circumstance takes work, but it can energize you. Once you keep focusing on what energizes you and have a picture in your mind, you visualize this new person you're becoming and begin with the end in mind and start acting like the person you want to be. But do it now. Act like the person that you want to be. Act like those circumstances are on the way to you. What you're thinking about, what energizes you. Because now you're modeling the universe that continues to grow and expand. And you'll be more willing to have a dialogue with people who disagree with you, or you won't care. If you can't control the circumstance, then you have to let it go. That's life happening for you, is trying to wake you up to let this crap go. Let it go. Live your life. No matter what happened yesterday, can you go have an egg today? Can you go have some cereal? Can you go get in the car and go do something you enjoy? Can you still paint a picture? Can you still write something? Can you do a Vimeo? Can you send a message to the world about your thinking without regard for whether it rewards you financially? The reward is it energizes you. Everything else takes care of itself when you become the master of circumstance because you're doing things to forward humanity. It energizes you. There's a reason it energizes you. The universe, God, the divine, the goddess, whatever you call it, is urging you to give this to the world. Just give it away. That's what I'm doing today. I'm giving it away. And it energizes me. If one person gets this message today and makes a choice to get on a journey of reminding themselves, reprogramming themselves, training their mind, getting over the BS stories they tell themselves, that's my job. I'm not worried about anything else. I don't think about it. I think about what energizes me, and it's what I love to do. Now, if you have any questions for me, or if you'd like a free coaching, by the way, I'll give you a 2-hour coaching if you like. You email me. Here's Steve Lentini. Steve Lentini. So you email Steve over here, Steve at stevelentini.com. Steve at stevelentini.com. I'm glad to help. It's what I do. You can go to Amazon and buy any of my books. Like I said, I'll have a dozen books when the In Plain Sight book comes out later this year. If you don't want to, that's okay. Even viewing this video, which is free, you're entitled to my gift, a free 2-hour coaching. And by the way, if you don't use it, give it to someone else. Say, hey, I met this guy online, Steve Lentini. He gave me a gift for a 2-hour free coaching. If you email him, Steve at Steve Lentini, tell him I gave the gift to you. Say a friend of mine watched the video, read one of his books, and said, if I didn't want the coaching, I could give it away as a gift. You just got a gift. And if you want, you can give it away. Either way, that energizes me. Giving energizes me. The receiving takes care of itself. Now, I have to welcome in the receiving as well, by the way. That's a circle. I have to make sure that circle is complete. But I'm glad to receive. When I was in the hospital, which turned into 100 days, by the way, 60 days straight and 40 out of the next 60, and 6 months out of work, $24,000 came in the mail and 5 job offers. Some from clients, some from people I had worked with, some from a few friends. Not sending out any resumes or looking for a job while I was in the hospital. So we live in a miracle. We live in something that's an energy wanting us to be energized and doing what energizes us so that we're forwarding the work of the universe, the continual growth and expanding the consciousness of the universe. And that's my job, is expanding the consciousness of humanity, one person at a time. And it started with me. And I have to continue to work on that daily. Try it. Experiment with it. And what I do is for your success. That's what I'm hoping to do. And it energizes me, so I'll continue. Thank you.